Hi everyone, my name is Tyler Okamoto. I'm a professor in management and the Associate Dean Academic within UQ's Faculty of Business, Economics, and Law. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to tonight's panel discussion on how to be a better leader. But first and foremost, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands of which we meet today. On behalf of the University of Queensland, I pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. Now, noting that we have attendees from every corner of the globe tonight, I would like to extend that respect to the traditional owners wherever you might be joining us from. We recognize the incredibly valuable contributions of our First Nations people here in Australia and those of our broader global community. I would also like to welcome our panelists joining us tonight. Professor Deborah Terry, AC, Mr. Andrew Liveris, AO, and Associate Professor James Kirby. Thank you for joining us tonight, everybody. And a warm welcome to our distinguished guests, UQ alumni, staff, and friends of UQ. We're privileged to host actually more than 1,100 guests here tonight from over 50 countries, from Azerbaijan to Zambia, and all nations in between. Thank you for joining us, and welcome. Now, before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. Today's webcast is being recorded, so in the unlikely event that a technical issue arises, it will be available to view later using the same link. You'll also receive the recording in an email a few days after the event. I'd also like to point out the interactive features of our webcast player. If you move your mouse over the screen at the bottom right corner, you'll see 3 small dots. If you hover your mouse over those dots, you'll see some options. You can send through a question or a comment by clicking Ask a Question. Towards the end of the session, we'll take as many questions as possible. Now, if you do experience any technical difficulties during the webcast, please try refreshing your browser in the first instance. If you're still having issues, feel free to click the Info button to find the link to access live chat support. Now, tonight's ChangeMaker event is on how to be a better leader. What does it take to make it as a leader and to do it well? Now, I've been teaching leadership at UQ for 11 years now, and I can tell you that this question has never been more important or more challenging. In that time, there's been a dramatic increase in the importance of diverse stakeholder views, with tides shifting towards purpose over profit, sustainable growth, equity and diversity, and particularly for organizational leaders, increased accountability for balanced performance in all of these domains. Fortunately for us tonight, we have our chance to ask burning questions of our distinguished panelists. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm hoping for some new insights on how to lead with vision, empathy, and inclusion in our complex and changing world. Now, to introduce our panelists, let's begin by welcoming UQ's Vice Chancellor and President, Professor Deborah Terry, AC. Debbie is a highly experienced leader in the Australian university sector, as well as an internationally recognized scholar in psychology. She is currently a fellow and past president of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia, as well as an appointed member of the ARC Advisory Council, among other roles. Debbie began her distinguished career at UQ in 1990 and rejoined us in August 2020 after spending 6 years as Vice Chancellor of Curtin University in Western Australia. Thank you for joining us, Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next on our panel, please welcome Andrew Liveris, AO. Andrew is the president of the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games Organizing Committee and the former chairman and CEO of the Dow Chemical Company. As a highly respected voice in the global business community, Andrew currently serves as a director of Lucid Motors, IBM, Saudi Aramco, Worley, Novonix, and the Minduro Foundation. His recent book, Leading Through Disruption, was published last year by HarperCollins Leadership US. Thank you for joining us, Andrew.
Thank you, Tyler.
And for our final panelist tonight, we welcome Associate Professor James Kirby. James is a clinical psychologist and the co-director of the Compassionate Mind Research Group at UQ. James is a senior lecturer in our outstanding School of Psychology and is an honorary associate professor at the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University. His first book, Choose Compassion, was published in 2022 by UQ Press. All right, let's jump right in. Now, each of you has navigated significant challenges in your respective fields, so we're really hoping to harness some of your insights. Andrew, we might start with you. Can you share a specific experience where you've had to lead through significant change, and what leadership qualities did you see were the most useful for you during those times?
Thanks, Tyler, and a real privilege to join my UQ sisters and brothers around the world. I and the panelists, of course, need to say no more about both the fellow panelists. When I look at the time I spent as CEO of Dow, there were three major crises that I think I could answer your question with, but I'll just home in on one, which I think, still gives me goosebumps when I talk about it, and that is through the global financial crisis, we were caught in the middle of our largest acquisition ever. Banks were failing around us, money was stopping to flow, our credit rating went to near junk status. S&P and Moody's basically called us in and said, you have to sell assets, stop your dividend, a whole range of different things. And to have the company at near bankruptcy late December 2008, I was CEO for 4 or 5 years. It took everything I knew and then a whole lot of things I didn't know to look to how to take the company out of this incredible, difficult circumstance. I do detail it in greater detail in the book you referenced, but to answer the question on attributes, I did something which I started to do quite a lot of as I went through my career. I'd done it once or twice already, but I really did it during this period of time. And that is to lift myself almost out of my body, if I can say it that way, and look at everything holistically and say, what is my team expecting of me? What is my board expecting of me? What is the entire group of people, 60,000 employees, expecting of me in this moment to absolutely take and navigate the company out of near bankruptcy? And the attributes that I discovered about myself and applied many times since over is absolutely, totally to adopt a sense of calm, confidence, don't blink, an ability to actually say, there is a future, here's the path to the future, to undertake a series of steps, incremental, that actually showed that future, and to align people with this notion that the leader was not shaken nor rattled, but absolutely could take us forward in this moment in time. There was a need for connectivity like never before. It kind of reminded us, me in particular, that we're all small family companies at the end of the day. And Dow was 120 years young, but still a very big family. And I really wanted everyone to see the human side of being in a family that's stuck together and aligned, and through perspiration, hard work, and effort could be led to, out of this crisis. I think those attributes are very important. I think you've got to show the person and not the role. You've got to show empathy and connectivity and align the team and to make sure the team knows you care. And you've got to be, and I'll just finish with this word, ubiquitous. You have to be all pervasive and ubiquitous, whether it's through the screen or in person.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Andrew. I find it really interesting that you hit on a lot of the best practice in crisis leadership, but at the same time you got there through empathy and by actually thinking about what your people need from you, and not just your immediate team right there in front of you, but all the different stakeholders that you're responsible for managing. So it's a really, really useful insight. Debbie, I'm sure that you've been through many challenges as well. Any insights from your perspective?
Yeah, well, thank you, Tyler. And just to say, delighted to be part of this panel today. And obviously, my warm welcome to all of our UQ alumni, friends and colleagues. I'm going to say a number of things that certainly Andrew has touched upon. I'm going to take a slightly different situation, which is for, all of us, wherever we are in the world, we will all remember, obviously, the impact of COVID as an extraordinarily challenging period, but also its aftermath. But in higher education, that meant literally overnight, with many thousands of students, we had to shift to online learning. In the case of UQ, we had many of our students offshore, so we were engaging with our students online and offshore. A very challenging time for our staff, with ongoing uncertainties and pressures, and obviously working from home. And these changes had to happen overnight, but of course it was an extended period. And I think one of the challenging things about COVID has been that, in a way, we all thought that things were going to snap back to what we'd been used to pre-COVID, and of course we are still adjusting in many ways to a new post-pandemic normal. Now, as a leader through that period, and I'm going to touch on Andrew's very wise words as well, I felt I needed to, and I spanned 2 universities through this period. I started off when the pandemic really hit in that, January 2020, that none of us will ever forget. I was at Curtin University, and then, of course, transitioned to my role at UQ in August. But I needed to tread, as did other leaders, across all companies and sectors, that delicate path between providing hope and clarity for the future, but at the same time, I think having the honesty and courage to admit that we didn't have all of the answers. We didn't know how long it was going to last. We didn't know what it would mean for our borders, both at the state level and the federal level. There were so many unanswered questions. As Andrew said, the need to communicate frequently and to be as transparent as possible, and to everything that we knew to be absolutely clear, the regular updates. You have to show empathy and compassion for the impact that the situation is having on individuals and, of course, across whole communities. But also, and again, I think Andrew touched on this, role modelling composure, courage, resilience, because it's these kinds of qualities that help to instill the confidence that's obviously vital to just restoring a sense of normality in a very, very uncertain time. But at the same time, I think you have to be willing to articulate a vision for the future, and as much as you can, project a clear and realistic path going forward. And I think as leaders through this period, we've all struggled, obviously, with the complexity and the uncertainty, but I think relied on those kinds of leadership attributes. Of course, it brings to mind, and it brought to my mind many times through this period, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's famous line, and I quote, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." This is, there is no unsolvable problem if we face it wisely and courageously, and I would add to that, one step at a time. So thanks, Tyler.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. Thank you. That theme of courage really comes through strong. And the other thing that maybe is perhaps unsaid is that the integrity aspect of it. That you need to be honest, and even if it means discomfort for your people at the moment. Now, I might direct my next question at James. Now, leadership, particularly in times of change, often requires making those hard decisions that could affect the lives of others. How can leaders cultivate empathy without being overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility that falls on your shoulders in these situations?
Oh, thanks, Tyler, for that very easy question. No, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? And I think Andrew and Debbie spoke brilliantly to how at the core there's a lot of courage in the leadership, because when you're having to make decisions, there's a lot of people involved, and those people are not all the same. They're in different levels, different backgrounds, serving different roles, and the decision you make will have differential impacts on all the people involved in the group or organisation or whatever the workforce is you're you're teaming up with. So it's hard, isn't it? When we look at the terms, I think that's important too. So when we talk about empathy, what we're really kind of talking about is our ability to try to get a sense of how the other person might be feeling or their perspective on the situation. And of course, that's easier to do when it's one person and it's one person that we know. You can get a better sense, but when it's a large group, that makes empathizing, well, with who? It's a large group, that makes it very difficult. And also, secondly, empathy doesn't inform us on what to do per se. So it might give you insight into how people might be thinking and feeling, but then we use that as an informer to what kind of behaviour we want to see or what kind of motivations behind it. And of course we would say, well, from my perspective anyway, compassion is absolutely key in a lot of these situations, particularly when difficult decisions are being made. And often when we hear difficult decisions, that means there's going to be a cost for someone, and that cost can range from loss of work, etc. So it can be very painful in those circumstances. So the heart of the question was around how do you maintain that kind of connection without being overwhelmed with the difficulty, and that balance will be tricky. If you stay in the empathic zone, it kind of can lead to personal distress. And it's also recognising that the other person isn't you, it's someone else. And so it's also a sense of recognising, okay, these are different feelings, different perspectives, and I might not actually have that accurate prediction into what they're experiencing. So asking questions, trying to hear and understand their perspective is absolutely important and critical to that process. As a leader, sometimes we might be wanting to quickly move things along, but slowing it down so the people who are affected are consulted and feel like there's been adequate time given to them to be able to be seen and be heard so that we can understand what they're experiencing is really important.
Yeah, thanks for that, James. Now, on a related question, I'm going to direct this one at you, Debbie. We all know how hard you work for UQ, so this might be a particularly hard-hitting question. In your experience, how can leaders prioritize self-care and well-being while still meeting the demands of their roles? Or if you want to take an easier tack on it, what role do organizations need to play in supporting the health of their leaders?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, Tyler. And I mean, I do think fundamentally it's essential that we practice what we preach. And we need to be absolutely conscious of our responsibilities to our staff and making sure that they take leave, that they've got the support to help manage their roles, whether that's through mentoring or coaching or access to personal development. So I think it's essential that we are seen to be practicing, in a sense, what we preach, making sure we take leave, that we limit, that we don't send emails out of hours that can easily, be dealt with during normal work hours. And at the same time that we really, acknowledge the workload involved in delivering on major deadlines and projects. So, obviously, our role is to, as I say, role model the way in which we want our leaders across the institution, what we want them to do. But as I say, we've got a critical role to play in really supporting our leaders' health, and also helping leaders to recognise their own limits, to foster, obviously, self-reflection, which is a vital part of good culture, embed a culture that values self-care. It's not a luxury, it's essential to good performance, good decision-making, and it's a responsibility that we have at all levels of our institutions.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. It's a great point that it's not a luxury, it is a responsibility. Now, James, given your experience as a psychologist, do you have any words of wisdom on this one as well?
Debbie was kind of hitting the nail on the head there. The kind of being self-aware during those moments is really difficult at times. Like, you can be caught up in the stresses. I mean, goodness, what Andrew was describing there earlier in the height of that financial crisis, that sounded awfully stressful. So sometimes that self-reflection at those moments and that self-awareness to engage in that can be, really the key to success in those moments. And so there's a part of being self-aware and self-reflective to look after your care, but also critically is, how are we at receiving support from people around us? So do we have support from, say, colleagues or loved ones, for example, but also how is the organisation itself giving you care, and are you able and open to receive that care? I mean, some of the work we've done in healthcare, for example, with doctors kind of shows that, doctors are very reluctant to expose any vulnerability, particularly around mental health when it comes to things like depression, because as soon as others hear that they're struggling with depression, other doctors are less likely to refer them patients, and also will see them as less competent. So, often we can mask or try to hide our vulnerability out of fear of stigma or shame that could be associated, and also judgment of competency. And so there's this tricky balance of, can we be aware and self-reflective ourselves? How much are we giving out, and how much are we supported by people around us? And it can get tricky at times.
Yeah, that's a great point, James. I've had the privilege of recently working with a leader that did have the opportunity to step forward with courage to address some of their own mental health struggles, and did so in a way that everyone was aware of, and the power of that vulnerability in drawing support and bringing people together around what needed to be done was really inspiring. Now, one of the resilience challenges that I struggle with in my own leadership practice is that no matter how well you're doing, leaders are often subject to, let's call it, feedback, both constructive and sometimes not so constructive. Now, Andrew, in your experience, how do you distinguish between that feedback that is valid and needs to be heard versus the unwarranted criticism that might not necessarily be coming from such a nice place? Maybe if you would be able to share a time when you've received some challenging feedback, and maybe how you've used it to reflect on and improve your leadership practice.
Yeah, many things come to mind, and certainly I can give you many examples, but maybe to stay with the central thematic of the dialogue process that occurs. And let's say you're at one rank, and the manager and you are dialoguing about that, and the feedback's occurring in that mode, so a performance review, or it's happening unsolicited in a meeting environment and someone said something which is directed at you, or it's in a one-on-one, just back and forth. I learned along the way that where you are in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, you've got to take this attitude that 2 ears, 1 mouth, very Confucian. So everything is good. Feedback, constructive criticism is good. Criticism reveals the other person, actually. So if you learn how to deal with it, even though in the moment it may bite or it may hurt, what you're doing and what you're listening to is the other person. And the other person is coming from a position. And that position may or may not be data-based, it may or may not be fact-based, but that position is something you need to integrate into your understanding of people at large. It actually helps you become a better leader and manager because you're showing openness, and most importantly, you're not reacting in the same way. You're not doing tit for tat, you're not criticizing back. As I develop a leadership style and learn from others, obviously mentors along the way were a safe harbor to actually play out this notion that, hey, I heard something about me or my performance that I didn't like. Can you please give me a view? And, it's safe talking to that person because that person has shown trust and respect and really has your best interests at heart. One specific feedback I got along the way in an official performance review, and it was one of these 360 loops where lots of people commented, so you didn't quite know where it came from, but it said, Andrew is a born manipulator. Now, I read that and I said, okay, that doesn't sound too good. What does actually that mean? So I took that to heart. And what I started to do with that was, I think what I was doing was I was expressing my opinion on something before I had a chance for everyone to express theirs. And worse still, when theirs got expressed, I still made it that it was my opinion that won the day. And those of us in leadership positions, certainly of rank, know that everyone's attenuating to what you say. And so what you've got to learn is to button it and absolutely totally listen very carefully, and then try and find that better position, which may still be the position that you started thinking about as the solution space or whatever the topic was. So I learned that even manipulation had a positive aspect to it if done based on the right listening skills and the right facts. When I became CEO, one of the things I integrated into my style, if you like, was one-on-one meetings with the people who directly reported to me. Let's call it the C-suite. Would be one-on-one if they were 15 minutes, and in that 15 minutes, they articulated what they wanted to talk to me about, whatever the problem was, and then they had a solution to that problem. In other words, they came forward with a solution to whatever they were bringing to me. What that helped me do is actually help them, A, with the solution. Was there a better solution? Stress test that. But for sure, avoid this notion that they were delegating upwards. Because, we pay people a lot of money to actually come with statements that they are willing to live with, be accountable, so to speak, for their previous topic. That instituted a discipline. Did I let the 15 minutes become 30 occasionally? Of course I did. But the notion of the style was, if you have feedback, have a solution. If you have criticism that just goes up into air, then that's a technique that's not tolerated in the culture. And over time, that gets weeded out, where people who are problem solving and giving feedback in a constructive way dominate the culture.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I really love that. It's that problem orientation that you kind of both apply to yourself in kind of recognizing what information you can gain and utilize for your own learnings, but then also, as we're talking about kind of role modeling, holding that expectation of those around you as well. That was really useful insight. Thank you. A bit of a change in direction. Debbie, in today's global landscape, diversity and inclusion are increasingly recognized as critical components of effective leadership. How have you championed diversity and inclusion within your own spheres of influence?
Yeah, no, thanks, Tyler. And I think the key issue around diversity and inclusion, which is absolutely critical in so many ways, I think it is being a champion in a way that is both authentic and really reflects a deep commitment to shifting the dial in this really important area. So for me, that's involved ensuring that a commitment to diversity and inclusion are absolutely embedded as UQ values, and that we refer to those values a lot, and they're an anchor for our culture and the way we make decisions. Second point I'd make is that I always make sure that as much as I possibly can, I am involved in appropriate leadership roles in relation to our strategies and approaches in this area. It is something that I don't delegate, and I think it's really important not to. Obviously, I'm not there at every single relevant meeting, but it's not something that I think it's appropriate for me to delegate. It's something that is central to my leadership style. And I think we have to, as an institution, set appropriate targets. We've got to track our performance, and we've got to do that around our diversity and inclusion targets as much as we do in relation to our core targets in other areas, our university rankings, our research performance, our teaching performance, etc. But in terms of shifting the dial, I also think there's much to be gained from calling out and focusing on a very specific goal. So something that is a central plank of our current strategic plan is what we call the Queensland Commitment. And it really points to a university-wide commitment to, if we look forwards to 2032, when Brisbane's hosting the Olympics and Paralympics, that we want to grow the proportion of students that we have from educationally disadvantaged, underprivileged backgrounds to 30% by that time. And we've set a very, very clear target. And as I say, it's a central plank of our current strategic plan.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. I like that it's about articulating the commitment, setting targets, and then holding ourselves accountable. And one of the things that you said at the beginning that I really liked is the fact that really what we're trying to move here is the cultural element, and recognizing that as leaders, we have the tools and the levers to shape that culture, but culture also lives and breathes on the ground, and so it's really our broader workforce that we need to engage in the mission and being on the ground, working with people on some of these issues is really great approach to push that. James, are you aware of any effective strategies for fostering an inclusive environment and leveraging diverse perspectives?
Yes, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Tyler. I mean, thinking of examples like in university sort of lecture situations, there's a lot of diverse students coming together, taking a subject. So, for example, I teach positive psychology in second year, absolutely love it. And it's a huge range of different students coming together from different backgrounds. And then when we go into tutorials and do exercises, often they'll be in groups and even group assignments. And sometimes there's just a sense that the group will just know what to do, where they can work together. And you let them go. And often what you can start to see is a dominant spokesperson speaks up who has some confidence, who's a bit extroverted perhaps, maybe a bit like me, and starts talking away and can kind of dominate the group. And others within the group can kind of feel like excluded, they haven't got a voice. So there can be some very simple, almost micro techniques one can do, and one can lead and establish as just basic kind of principles on group work to help the group and the members within the groups feel like they've been heard, given a chance to voice a view and to contribute and make a contribution to whatever the learning pieces are. And so providing time to enable that, and the tutor and the lecturer to give the opportunities to give voice to what that would look like is really important, because often you can see in the group work that the shy student, perhaps on the edges, on the peripheral, not seemingly feeling like they belong. And that's a huge factor here. We want to try to make students, and no matter where you are, everyone within the organisation or group to feel like they're belonging to the group and have a role to play. So there are some micro techniques you can do there in order to help facilitate that.
Thanks, James. Now, Andrew, I know this is also core to you, who you are as a leader as well, and so I wanted to see if you had any reflections on this topic as well.
Yeah, I mean, seeing Debbie mentioned it, I mean, my Brisbane role gives me a great opportunity to take lots of learnings that I've had over my career on how to be a positive change maker in the area of inclusion. And so certainly one of the paradigms of the Brisbane Olympics and Paralympics will be inclusion. It'll be one of our central themes. Inclusion, of course, diversity of view, diversity of input, but diversity of all of our nation's cultures, inclusive, of course, very clearly of our First Nations, and how we absolutely totally help people get to the table, in the room, at the table. I think the pipeline to get that done has to start, and luckily enough, we have the time for us at Brisbane 2032, but for organizations as a whole, it's a generational timeline and pipeline. Why? Because you've really got to start early in people's lifetimes and careers, and you've got to actually work in, as already said, in a social change mode. It can't be just facts and numbers and data. Sitting on all the boards I sit on, that was mentioned in the introduction, storied corporations like IBM or Dow struggle with this, and why we all struggle with it is it's if it's based on availability, you'll never be inclusive. So you've got to increase availability, and you've got to increase the ability for people who are left behind or left out, who don't have access to health and education and modern paradigms, two-parent families. These are all sorts of things that imply social change, which means that you've got to have a culture that is community-centric and socially centric. And you've got to go into areas, as you mentioned in the introduction, where purpose and the societal license to operate is given to you by a community. And the community is your entire community. And that to do that, you've got to improve the pipeline of talent that comes in. At Brisbane 32, we've just announced 5 interns we're going to have that are Indigenous interns that, we're going to struggle to find, but we're going to find them and train them so they can grow with us into significant positions in Brisbane 2032. At Dow, that's exactly what we did. We worked the pipeline and started doing work with schools and places across, in this case, the US in particular, where we could actually look at African American minorities, Hispanic minorities, Chinese, Asian in general, women, gender, really, people who don't look like us, and to get them into the pipeline of being recruited and then trained, and then to do that, short-circuit it so that you don't put them into spots where they can't perform. One of the ways we did that was absolutely totally at every level of management, to invite people into the room, sit at the table, listen carefully to how decisions get made, and actually be in the room so that by the time they got to that spot in their career, they knew what to do. They had the exposure. That also short-circuited unconscious bias, because it's alive and well in most large organizations, and unconscious bias and selecting in people who are more like you is actually the enemy of DEI. And so breaking and short-circuiting that was something that leadership, like the CEO, but the entire top 200 of the company, were made to do. Short-circuit so you can get people through the middle layers and the clay layers. So these are all the techniques we learn, but you should never, ever lose the fact that you actually have to basically get out there and do it yourself. If you don't role model it, it's just a number on a page and you're doomed to fail.
Oh, great. That's some really great insight, and I really like that you, when thinking about the why and the need, it's big picture thinking. It's about long-term horizons. But when rubber hits the road, you actually have to be in the room and make it concrete. Take responsibility for making it concrete yourself. Thank you for that. So still thinking about that bigger picture, I did want to ask the three of you a question about what comes next for you in your own leadership journey. So as you look towards the future, what legacy do you hope to leave behind as leaders in your respective fields? Maybe James, we'll start with you.
Okay. Yes. I mean, I'm so young. There's still so much more to go. I mean, I think that's part of it. No.
Aim high, James. Aim high.
I turned 40 this year, having a crisis. No. When I was thinking of that kind of idea of legacy, I suppose in my area, which is compassion and using compassion in all sorts of different ways, clinically to help with mental health, but also to kind of try to create societies where we're purposefully try to create conditions that optimize flourishing for people. So there's lots of things that we can do as a society and as a community, certain levers we can pull that can really give wonderful opportunities for people, which require some of us taking a hit or a cost or a sacrifice. And so I think as part of my legacy in the research space is starting to recognize how crucial compassion can be at helping deliberately and purposefully create communities that feel like they are understood, appreciated, and are also being involved in the process of being able to create from the bottom up, so that they have a kind of a real say in shaping the future that they're involved with. And that's with the research too, with the people you work with. I've got ideas that I would like to direct and go down, but people come in with such amazing ideas that I would never otherwise consider. And hearing and better understanding that, sometimes I'll have no, that's just not going to work, but just hold it, James, just give the person space, let them explore this further. Then a little bit further down the line, you recognize how it can be integrated in and how wonderful that idea was. So I guess in terms of, legacy, there are different aspects to that in terms of, research and where I see compassion and going in the Global Compassion Coalition, which I'm part of. One of the big things we're trying to do is try to create a compassionate connector network in low and middle income countries and trying to really help give voice to those to make political and educational and health changes in their environment to look after their children and give their children that opportunity. There's a bit of discourse at the moment around the fact that what lives are we leaving, or what world are we leaving for the next generation, and is it as good as what has happened before? And I think if compassion's not at the heart of that conversation, then we could be in some trouble.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, James. I certainly hope that you are successful in your endeavors. Debbie, we certainly don't want you to go anywhere anytime soon, but have you given any thought to legacy?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. And I really liked James's comments. And I think I might come at it from the institutional perspective. And I think legacy at the moment is something I think we all think about. We're living in, looking to a challenging and uncertain future. And I guess for me, in terms of legacy, it is in ensuring that at the end of my term, that UQ is in a stronger position to play the critical role that universities play in our society. I mean, they're critical foundations of strong civil societies, and they're really important institutions across the world. They're some of the world's longest living institutions, and many have been around for centuries. But what we need to do as an institution, and what I think about in terms of legacy, is that UQ continues to be seen to be offering the courses, the opportunities, the educational experiences that really position our students to be the leaders of the future, for future success and impact, and that we're seen to be a really engaged institution, that we partner well, that we're seen to be part of the solution to playing our role in helping to address the big challenges that will face humanity into the future. Some of the big issues around energy transitions, around climate change, and instability, social instability. I think we have to lean in to those challenges, be seen to be part of the solution, as I said before, also ensuring that the life-changing opportunities of education are open to all parts of our community. Education changes lives. It changes the future for whole communities, and we need to continue to play that role. But I think fundamentally, universities are about debate. We're about exchange of ideas. We're about free speech. We're about working to reduce polarization of views of how do we have that respectful debate. And I think for me, ensuring that as an institution, we continue to be that place is critically important for me.
Yeah. Thank you, Debbie. I think it's, being a part of the university is interesting in that part of our role is actually to enable others to understand and develop their own legacies, and in that way we can have impact that's exponential. Andrew, any reflections on your many legacies that you hope to leave behind?
Thank you. Well, I am older. I would say hopefully wiser, but the notion of legacy is pretty much what drives me today and everything I do. And what I have noticed in the last many years, and caused me to write the book I wrote, Debbie was hitting on many of these points around the disruptive world young people are growing up in, and take the verticals of environment, social, governance with a big G and a little g, geopolitical, digital. These are all tectonic changes that are occurring at such a rapid pace, at the speed of light, thanks to our digital world, that these notions of how to manage them, how to find the solution space, the generation that we're teaching and bringing up is looking to us and saying, hey, what did you give us? And then better still, why aren't you doing something about it? And most importantly, include us in the solution space. So that basically told me that what I've got to do, and I'm very driven to do this, is absolutely, totally define and help rebuild institutions for the 21st century. The ones that are running today are for the 20th century. And whatever form you want to consider an institution, all the way to academic, you really got to find a way to re-equip and retool those institutions to deal with the problems of the 21st century. Now, to do that, that's a big ask. And what I decided to do is, I'm going to be a voice of one that hopefully builds a voice of 100, that builds a voice of 1,000, that absolutely totally enlists and enrolls people into what that looks like. I tease out the notion that Western democracies and Western capitalism is going through a divorce, and that this notion of distribution of the spoils of the last 60, 70 years, post-World War II, that the baby boomer generation benefited from, and that the peace dividend and all the things we celebrated, including millions and hundreds of millions of people coming out of poverty, unfortunately has given us a planet in crisis, has given us social inequities, has given us imbalances between countries, and we still are fighting each other to solve the problems. Witness 2 wars going on. So this needs a rethink of massive proportions. And impact and legacy for me, and Debbie, thank you for the help and support of creating the Academy at University of Queensland, is to spend a lot of time, effort, resource, money to absolutely tool and equip our up-and-comers generations. You don't have to be in your early 20s, but certainly that age group, to get exposed to what leadership for the 21st century needs to look like by giving them access to people like people on this panel, but really more than that, on how others are solving the problems of our time. Show them what excellence looks like, build aspiration and inspiration from what excellence looks like, and then they go out equipped in the world and actually are part of the ChangeMaker, using the title of the panel, ChangeMakers, to absolutely lead the change, to help us rebuild those institutions. I think governments are not giving us that. So I think citizens and business communities and other institutions, like what Debbie's doing at the university, need to lead that. And that's a legacy I would like to be part of leaving.
Thank you, Andrew. Very well said. Now, we're going to try to jump to some audience questions. Thank you for everyone who's been sending these through. We've had a flood of fantastic questions coming in, and our team in back end is working furiously to try to put some themes together so that we can ask some questions. Our first question comes from Dylan, and this question's for James. Can you please elaborate on the micro techniques that can help facilitate team contributions and ensure that everyone has their voice heard, particularly the involvement of more introverted members?
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks, Dylan, for the question. I mean, some simple ones are just body language, for example. So if you're in a group format and someone is kind of, sitting back like like this, very comfortable in the chair, that's sending a certain signal to the other members of the group that they might be more dominant or in control. So just being aware of even body language or how you're positioning your body. And just tone of voice, using a friendly tone of voice can be very important. I mean, you're trying to create conditions that make the group, will give a sense of safety to the group, that they're able to share ideas on whatever the task is that they're having to perform. So, giving space, using people's first names, recognizing that sometimes there are differences in eye contact and also proximity, privacy in terms of space. These are all important considerations, and you're never going to get it perfect, but there are little things that we can do, little micro adjustments, if you will, in order to show to others that we're very interested in hearing from them and also learning from them and having fun with them in the exercises that we're having to do as a group.
Yeah, thanks, James. Really appreciate your reflections on that.
Very good, Tyler.
Our next question comes from Curtis. What is the best way to scale the professional ladder and go from employee to manager to leader? It's an interesting question, one I have found myself in having to move from working with the team to having to work with team leaders to get things done. So Debbie, maybe you want to kick us off with this one?
Yeah, no, thanks, Curtis, and thanks for the question. I might change, I guess, the question a bit to say, reflect on what support should you seek to succeed, and I guess my answer is twofold as you're scaling that professional ladder. I think my first point would be to take advantage of opportunities to broaden your knowledge and experiences. I think there's often a tendency, and when I'm involved in mentoring discussions, I'll often have this discussion, a tendency to really narrow one's focus on, what's the next step, what do I need to do, and to perhaps think about it in a very linear way. And I think, the reality is that those opportunities that might appear to be sideways steps or perhaps, potential distractions are often the things that provide you with the breadth and depth of experiences that are so essential to your success. And I think back over my career, being offered opportunities that I think, should I do that now? Does that make sense when, I'm thinking of the next step on the career ladder? And inevitably, they've exposed me to different experiences, and I've developed different skills. And, certainly through my research career, getting involved in things that weren't necessarily central to what I was involved in, always had beneficial impacts. I think the second thing is that networks of supported people are really critical. We only thrive with the support of our family, our friends, our colleagues, and having those, and I think Andrew reflected on it earlier, having those mentors and people that you can have those discussions with are absolutely critical. But, we've all been to many events over the years where we see, leaders and others winning awards. And what they'll do is they'll thank their teams, they'll thank their mentors, they'll thank their colleagues, their networks and people supporting them. And they'll often, say they were lucky to have the right people around them. But I don't think it is luck. It's connections and networks are partly built by design, by our own efforts. And so, in ensuring that we maintain those networks, that we've got those people that we can have those frank and honest discussions with to seek advice. But I think scaling the leadership ladder is definitely a combination of things. It can't happen without a network around you, and it can't happen without those around you who are prepared to encourage you, challenge you, but ultimately believe in you and support you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Debbie. Our next question comes from Kelly, who asks, how do you be a change maker and a leader when the job market is tight? You have the skills and experience and qualifications, but the jobs maybe just aren't there. Then what? Kelly expresses that this is a very real problem for her, at least in the UK. Andrew, do you have thoughts on this question?
I would start by answering the question the way I'm kind of prefacing what I see as the greatest opportunity of our lifetimes. We're in my view, a 1 in 100-year period of human history where human beings are becoming human doings. being is not enough. Doing is more important. Being human at all time is critical. Being human, the empathy question that was asked earlier, is very key to building culture, relationships, as Debbie just said, mentorships. The whole human relationship experience has never been more important. Maybe COVID brought that to a head again. We had to relearn it. We have all relearned it. And the employee of choice, the person that's getting recruited, is the one that shows their ability to be humans, but also to get things done. I think humanity should be and needs to be out of the hot air business and needs to be into get problems solved business. So my answer to the question, therefore, coming at it from the direction I just did, is create the skills and the space that solve these intractable problems. Learn as much as you can about the intersections, digital, sustainability, social inequities. Learn about solution spaces to some of the intractable problems that the AI world will bring us, and then make them your skill set to provide the solutions, and then market the hell out of yourself that you're actually going to join whatever organization with these skills that very few others are spending time in developing. Said another way, there's a lot of SMEs who have content. There's very few SMEs, subject matter experts, that have context. And if you can provide a prospective employee that combination of skills, you will get a job. If all else fails, start up your own business marketing those skills yourself, and you watch how many clients you will get. There's never been a greater opportunity to present yourself into the solution space than what these problems are bringing us today.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. The dynamic context that we live in really provides lots of opportunity for lifelong learning, and if you can get there faster into a space that other people haven't thought of yet, then it can help. Thank you for that. Now, it's been a really useful conversation. I can see lots of themes coming together across what seem to be, on paper at least, very different questions. But unfortunately, we do only have time for one final question tonight. And this one's going to come from Rachel, who asks, what hard-won leadership advice would you give to your younger self, and why? Debbie, maybe we'll start you off here.
Well, I'll come back to a couple of themes that I reflected on previously. Be open to opportunities and experiences, and I think Andrew's just given us a very articulated very well why that's absolutely critical. I think I would go one step further and perhaps say to my younger self that feelings of self-doubt and lack of confidence shouldn't deter you. In a sense, it's the times, I think when we don't have those feelings, that we're not stretching ourselves, we're not, really got our eye on what we can achieve and the goal, that we're least likely to be successful. So at all times, I'd say to my younger self, avoid complacency, surround yourself with people that challenge you, that are different to you, that have got different ideas, and build that network.
Yeah, thanks for that, Debbie. That challenge, a really great take home. James, any thoughts to your younger self, maybe 10 years ago?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think, motivating oneself to pursue things comes at a risk sometimes, because you're not always going to get the desired outcome that you're wanting, but how you continue to motivate yourself moving forward is really important. And I think looking back, I perhaps was far too critical at times about personal faults or failings within me that were perhaps beating myself over the head longer than what it needed to be, and started to get perhaps even too serious about some of it. So my younger self, I would say, this is going to sound awfully cliched in some ways, is be more self-compassionate. So like Debbie was saying, reflect with, encouragement, validating the efforts that I was really making, looking at the wins. Often I'd see all the flaws, but there were little wins in there too that I wasn't seeing. But people close to me could let me know and inform me with, but we don't always have that. But trying to create more of that internal motivation driver for myself is certainly what I would have wanted. Try to do it more now, but it's still difficult.
Thanks, James. Yeah, self-forgiveness, self-compassion, really good take home, and research is me search. Yes, yes, seems like it a bit. Andrew, words of advice for your younger self?
I think elements of what both James and Debbie have said, but maybe I can do it through a quote of a very famous American baseball player. If you see a fork in the road, take it. I think I was way too programmatic very young. Maybe that was the times. We all had a view to what it needed to go and do various things in a programmatic way. I'd be way more entrepreneurial way earlier. That's what I would tell my younger self. Go live the risk frontier all the time. Don't just, play safe to take a step forward. Take a step which might have more risk.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That does bring us to the end of our discussion this evening. I hope you were able to gain some key takeaways from our panelists. It's been wonderful to have so many members of our extended UQ community joining us. Thank you again for taking the time to engage with us. Now, I do encourage you to keep the conversation going by networking with your fellow alumni in the UQ ChangeMakers online community. You can find all the details here on the slide, or just Google ChangeMakers UQ. If you've heard any nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to reflect on later, remember that a recording of tonight's discussion will be circulated to everyone who registered in the coming week. We also hope that you can join us for our next ChangeMakers event in June, where we'll be asking, can you separate art from the artist? Thank you again for joining us. Have a great night or great day, morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you again for joining us. Take care.